The weeks following UCLA and USC's decision to join the Big Ten this past summer, there came out reports concerning the California Board of Regents possibly blocking UCLA's move to the Big Ten. And we want to make sure that we are in the know concerning the real story concerning UCLA's move, how it impacts the school, the student athletes, and the issues that could be involved, or some of the issues that have been blown out of proportion. We got Tony Altimore, certainly our friend here at the Voice of College Football, consultant, strategist, also the host of our Pac-12 shows and our USC shows. And of course, tonight, major stuff in the Pac-12 with USC taking on Utah for the Pac-12 championship. And Tony will be here to host post-game. Tony, how you doing today?
Doing great. It's a great day for the Trojans, and hopefully maybe an exciting day for the Pac-12.
Absolutely. Huge season for the Pac-12. Certainly a rebirth of the Pac-12 nationally in terms of competitiveness in football. UCLA, USC moving to the Big Ten, there was a lot of hope and optimism, a lot of excitement concerning it, but a lot of concerns that people have, whether legitimate or otherwise. So, and then this issue concerning the Board of Regents and their power over UCLA, or would-be power, was reported and talked about. So we want to get to the truth concerning UCLA's move and what they're contemplating and what the truth is.
Yeah, well, I thought today we can talk about kind of some context of what's going on here. We can talk about what happened at the meeting, and I'll actually give you guys a deep dive into who said what so that you can sort of make decisions for yourselves as you watch. And then let's dig a little bit into UCLA's finances. And I've got some info for you that I think is actually, I've actually sent it to John Canzano too. I think it's actually for him, and he was taking a look at some of the stuff, because I think it's actually a deeper dive into UCLA's finances than even the LA Times has done. So you guys in the Voice of College Football, we'd love to give you guys the inside info on what's really going on behind their books. Should we dive in?
Yes, let's get to it.
All right. So first of all, I've got something for you guys that a lot of people don't know. And that is that sort of the structure of the University of California system, which we have to talk about just here for a minute. So the University of California is the overall encompassing group over, I think it's about like 12 campuses or something. What's important is that, so UCLA was established in 1919. They took over the normal school, the teacher school in LA, and it's turned into what they call the Southern Branch. Well, the LA people were not happy. And so in 1926, they actually said, all right, from now on, Cal and UCLA are equal. So ever since 1926, everything about UCLA has to be equal to Cal as far as preeminence. So like in Pennsylvania or Ohio State, like Penn State and Ohio State, like those are the heads of those systems. You know, in Michigan, like, you know, Ann Arbor campus trumps U of M's like little Flint campus or whatever. In California, Cal Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and UCLA are equal. They're, even though Berkeley's older and like thinks of itself as the parent, it is not the parent. Now, the other more specialized campuses, UC Santa Barbara, UC Santa Cruz, UC San Diego, Irvine, Riverside, the medical school at UC San Francisco are sort of lower in the tier. Now, there's some other weird elements of this because, like, for example, when it was originally just one school, like Cal's farm school became UC Davis, and their medical school became UC San Francisco. So there's some complexities to that, but in general, Cal is not the parent. Cal is equal. Now, the UC Regents are kind of interesting because they have dived into conference realignment before, sometimes being a little bit of a mess. So, for example, in 1957, when there were big fights in the old Pacific Coast Conference, the Regents made a 5-point plan to dictate that if you were going to play Cal or UCLA, your athletic department had to meet these 5 points, except they didn't actually do the math on it. Turns out Michigan was the only non-Ivy school in the country that met those 5 points. And Michigan was not going to play Cal and UCLA 10 times each. So that was a problem. Now, in 1957, because the regents sort of at the time could make this decision, they made the decision to withdraw Cal and UCLA from the Pacific Coast Conference in partnership with USC, blew up the Pacific Coast Conference, and then the regents really drove the creation of the Pac-12, along with the chancellor from Cal. By the 90s, now they have this huge system, all that. This is the big thing. In 1991, the regents delegated authority to the chancellors to manage contracts for athletics. So they said, we're not doing this. So since then, they've had nothing to do with the realignments, and there have been conference realignments that dealt with UC San Diego, UC Davis, UC Riverside, or UC Merced. So, I mean, this is not first time realignments come up since the 90s. They have nothing to do with it. So on June 30th of this year, UCLA announced its plans to join the Big Ten. Now, what's interesting is they told some of the regents, but not all. We'll get into more of that in a little bit, but there was a lot of drama. The regents felt blindsided by this, but the powerful ones knew, and the ones who weren't going to complain about it knew, which is interesting. Now, what's interesting is that from June 30th to July 13th, UCLA signed its grant of rights agreement with the Big Ten on July 13th, or they signed their agreement with the Big Ten on July 13th. So in those 2 weeks, the regents didn't actually stop this from happening, which they could have. And in the 6 months since then, they haven't actually stopped it from coming. So that, it kind of, I think that sort of sets the tone for what we're seeing. Now, one thing I think that also matters is for people to remember that not everyone is innocent in this. The Stanford folks who are Stanford alumni community, Stanford community is tremendously powerful in California. Well, a lot of the richest people in California are all from Stanford. A lot of the regents are from Stanford. And who would love to take UCLA's place in the Big Ten? Very openly, Stanford and Washington. So a lot of the push to keep, and by the way, the chairman of the Pac-12 is the president of Washington. So remember, when you hear the Pac-12 talk about, we want to keep UCLA, nothing would make the chairman of the Pac-12 happier than to say, peace out, UCLA, I'm taking your invitation. Bye-bye. Or Stanford. So not everybody's interests in this are about UCLA. And then Cal already feels very, very smited because UCLA has passed Cal in academic rankings in some of them. So there's already a little bit of rivalry there. Now, what's interesting about this last Regents meeting is that there was a 90-minute closed session beforehand that went way over time. And the New York Times, we don't know what really happened there, but the New York Times has told us what the Regents talked about, reported according to the New York Times. So the first thing they said is that, so the Regents, when they talk about the Regents approving the move to the Big Ten, what the Regents are doing is they have the ability to say, we are going to rescind your ability to make conference decisions and just make it on our own if we want, which I don't think they want. We're going to get to in a minute. But first of all, terminating the Big Ten agreement would cost UCLA $15 million. There's a $15 million penalty in that, according to the New York Times. So all this nonsense you guys hear about, oh my God, it'd be billions of dollars of lawsuits. Nope, it's a $15 million fine. That's it. The Pac-12 has offered to pay that $15 million at no cost to the University of California. Pac-12 will eat that money. Now, the Pac has also report. I'm sorry, I froze up. My internet's really crummy today, guys. If I freeze up for a sec, sorry. The Pac-12 has offered UCLA extra money, more than anybody else. So UCLA would get 42 to 47 million in media rights money, which is a much bigger share than anybody else. Now, the catch to that is that's how it used to be. Before Larry Scott, USC and UCLA got way more money than everybody else anyway, and so did Washington. So, that's not new, but that's the thing is the Big 12, for example, their media rights is 31 million. UCLA would be probably getting about 47. So there's a lot of money because, of course, keeping the LA market makes the Pac-12 contract worth much more. We know that there was a lot of discussions with legal and financial experts. They've talked about policy proposals. But one of the big things that really matters here is for the regents, they don't really want to be getting into the minutia of this anyway. Although some of them are pretty ticked. And one of them said that they think their decision should be like a replay of a football game call. So let's talk about what we heard and what we didn't hear in the actual meeting. So my big takeaway is this was the stuff was okay. Like they talked a lot about the implementation. They did what Regents should do and talk about overseeing whether UCLA is being prepared for this. They talked about whether athletes' well-being and success is being addressed. They want to make sure that athletes' voices are being heard. They talked a lot about UCLA's ability to fund the athletic department with athletic funds, and so they're currently at a deficit. They talked about the desire for UCLA to be profitable and support academics. They talked about concern from the direction of intercollegiate athletics. But what I think is more important is what we didn't hear. And what we didn't hear in the open session of the meeting is any talk at all about unwinding the Big Ten transition process. We didn't hear really any discussions of the Pac-12 or any financial impacts on Cal. We've covered that already a little bit, but we didn't hear any more of it today. We didn't hear any talks about really revoking the delegated chancellor authorities. We didn't hear any discussion of financial penalties to UCLA or any talk of subsidizing Cal. And we also didn't hear any doofus questions, kind of like we did earlier, like, why don't we just drop to Division III? The doofus people in the Regents, and they're not doofus people, they're brilliant educational policy people, but they're not sports people. And those people shut their mouths in this meeting. And we also didn't hear any defenses of the move, which made me ask, pretty much seems like it's already done. The biggest thing of all is there is somebody on the Regents who should be the biggest expert of all in this. And that's Peter Guber. Regent Guber is the CEO of Mandalay and the owner of the Golden State Warriors. He's also like a star guest professor at UCLA. You know what he had to say about this? Not a darn thing. Kept his mouth shut the entire time. Now, if they were interested, like actually in talking about it and debating about it and changing something, yeah, I think that this is the person that would have been talking and asking questions and getting his input. No, they sat silently. So I think it was a lot of just sort of lip service. But they are still finagling, and they're talking a lot about making sure that things are ready to support the student athletes. And so there's going to be another meeting on December 14th where they're going to have a special meeting at UCLA where they're going to then put this issue to bed forever. So let's talk about what they actually did talk about and why we think they're going to get that. So they did a survey, a student response survey, and we have some data from the survey. And Vice President Pamela Brown, who is as Cal Berkeley as they come. She has 2 degrees from there. She works in Berkeley. She's very involved in San Francisco. She presented the data. She did the analysis. Her office did the analysis on the data, and we'll show you the data in a minute. But like the data is really legit. Comes from the most legit source. UCLA Chancellor Block talked a lot about the plans and all that, but we very much treated it like a fait accompli. Like it was all about how we're managing the Big Ten. No justifications about why we should go to the Big Ten, just how we manage it. And I'll tell you guys how I used to work in government a long time ago, and like nothing in his comments would imply that he was in jeopardy of getting his like greatest public professional humiliation of his 15 years as CEO of the school. Like if he was about to be publicly humiliated, he would have worded his comments and stuff a lot differently than he did. Instead, they're just talking about how UCLA is making the investment and implementation plans and what they're doing to support all students. Martin Jarman, the athletic director, talked a lot about the student athlete support, the steps UCLA was doing, and how much time and effort UCLA spent meeting with its student athletes. And again, he also showed deference to the Regents, but this would be a career limiting move for him if it was to be revoked. And that was not at all the tone you got from him. This is where it gets interesting. So Regent Cohen is the CFO of CalPERS, right? So this is a finance guy, former chief policy advisor to Governor Brown, the guy who used to run the budget of the state of California. Undergrad from Stanford, master's from Texas. He made the point, and again, so this guy knows all the money. And anything he's saying is just to make a very public point, right? Like he's not like asking real questions. He's just making a point. And I thought this got really interesting because he made the point that UCLA is in an ongoing state of deficit. And then he made it really clear that UCLA could just absorb the athletic department's losses if it wanted. There's no rule saying it can't. UCLA is choosing to put its athletic department in debt. It's loaning itself the money to put itself in debt if they want. So if they wanted to, they could just pay it. But he says they shouldn't have to, and they shouldn't want to, because athletic losses impair, like, the money that's spent on it, that's, lost in athletics, then takes away from services that UCLA can provide to the rest of their students. And ideally, UCLA should be making profits from athletics and benefits from athletics that support the rest of the students instead of losing money. We'll look at losing money in just a sec, but like, this is big. This is a guy just like nailing it home. So then President Drake, President Drake is an interesting guy. Mark, you probably remember him. He was the president of Ohio State. Now this guy, he's a famous medical professor who then became chancellor of UC Irvine, and then president of Ohio State, and then came back as president of the whole UC system. So every campus has a CEO, a chancellor, who has these designated powers, but he's the head of the whole thing. So he talked about Ohio State a little bit. He didn't use it by name, but he was talking about Ohio State and how Ohio State uses its athletic revenue and its best practices to improve service for all students. They talk about how things that they launch to the athletic department, student support, whatever, teach them how to better support the rest of their students. And about how also Chancellor Block talked about how UCLA prides itself on its outstanding support to all of its students. Now, Regent Cohen did point out that while there's lots of Big Ten money coming in, that UCLA needed to not have a caste system where athletes have like just exponentially better student life than everybody else. And they're like, no, we want everybody to do well. Now, then we did have one little bit of snark here, and that is Regent Lark Park. So she was former senior policy advisor to Governor Brown. She's a Cal alum, and she got a little snarky, and she said something about, her phrase was, well, UCLA's desire and decision. Real snarky in how she said that. And then she called on both Chancellor Block and called Cal's Chancellor Christ, Dr. Christ, down to the front to talk, to ask them how their thinking has evolved on athletes and athletics and the broader UC community. Totally unnecessary. But like this was the bit of grandstanding. It was a little interesting. So Chancellor Block barred out. He's, by the way, the second longest tenured CEO in the Pac-12, only behind ASU President Michael Crow. He's held every role in Pac-12 leadership. He's been chairman of the Pac-12, and he has 3 degrees from the Pac-12. And he pointed out, he said, the Pac-12 is family. He's the guy who went to Stanford, has 2 degrees and his PhD from Oregon, and spent 29 years at Virginia and was the provost of Virginia before UCLA. So he talked about how this is a serious situation and how the Big Ten was the best move UCLA could make. And then he got a little zingy at the Pac-12. And he talked about how the Big Ten brings competitive excellence and exposure that UCLA athletes need. Hint, hint, they're not getting it in the Pac-12. And the additional money that they need. So that was some zingers. So then Dr. Christ, the chancellor from Cal, talked. And I thought she kind of laid an egg, guys. She highlighted, she said, this is an extraordinarily volatile time in college athletics, and fluid was her wording. She was really wistful, and she said, I'm seeing changes that I very much decry, and talked about pay for play and professionalization. And she did make a point I thought was arguably accurate. I don't really know. It's debatable. But she said, having more conferences and stronger conferences has a retarding effect on that. So she thinks that as we condense into these super conferences, we get more pay for play, more professionalization, more big time, and that having more conferences doesn't affect that. And she thinks that weakening and consolidating conferences is bad for sports, especially women's sports and non-revenue sports. Very nice points, but you know what? Also very convenient for the Chancellor of Cal to feel that maybe UCLA shouldn't go there. But this is where I thought was next two. I thought were really interesting points. So Keith Ellis, who's a UC Merced guy, not a Berkeley guy, but a UC Merced guy, talked about the policy elements of this. So like, what should they be doing as Regents setting policy? And it was all forward looking. No, like, we should undo this decision. We need to codify and enshrine principles for next time. that there should be, we should have standards for implementation plans and how to assess travel and UC impacts, all very forward looking, meaning UCLA is gone. So for the future, what we need to look at. And this is big. And he said, we need to reiterate that we have delegated this to the chancellors. Boom. Like this is just a little thing he said, and nobody's talking about this in the media, but that's a mic drop. That means they're not going to change this, I don't believe. And he talked about how we need targeted communication plans to better notify the regents. Next time. Sorry, I'm freezing. How they should revise their standing orders to delegations of authority next January or March or whatever. Means they're not changing it. And then the last person to speak, and this is the last speaking that there was the student regent, one of the student regents, questioned the data collected, and she said she wanted more student data. She said, as a student, I'd like to hear from my peers, and said they should have UCLA student athletes come and speak in the next meeting. And they all just completely ignored her. And the regents, as soon as she was done, said, okay, and then just started talking about the next thing. So, again, if they were really worried about what UCLA students thought, maybe they would have let her talk. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I think it's pretty clear UCLA is off to the Big Ten. We've got a national conference that's going to stretch from the Statue of Liberty to the Santa Monica Pier. So let's dig into some stuff. Now, first of all, for financial stuff, this is very interesting. So this is from a previous meeting. They have blamed all of Cal's losses on USC. So the university, based on a bunch of different math, and they've quoted, which is pretty funny because he got snarky with them about it. They quoted Bob Thompson, former CFO of Fox, CEO of Fox Sports, and some other folks. They've run the math, and they have determined that Cal is going to lose about $12 million a year by the USC-UCLA realignment. And they blame USC for $9 million of that. So that's a big thing. So they're saying UCLA is only costing Cal $3 million, which is a big difference. So again, even experts expect UCLA to leave. Wilner says it's 95. Canzano says it's about 90. I think it's about 98% likely. And we're probably going to see a new Pac-12, probably with one or two new members. So let's dig into the survey data and the finances. Let's talk about the data they actually found. So first of all, only they did a survey of UCLA athletes. Big data survey again, analyzed not by UCLA, but by the Office of the President. The lady you saw, Dr. Vice President Brown, who's as Berkeley as it gets. Only 7% of UCLA athletes said it was a bad idea. 55% said it was a good idea or no problem, and a bunch want more information. And the funny thing is, of the sports most impacted by travel, the sports that are going to travel more, they were more supportive of the Big Ten. So the people that are, quote, negatively affected actually liked the idea more because and why? We'll get to why in just a sec. But this was a really interesting takeaway. They asked, in the survey, they tried to figure out, is it important to be in USC's conference? And is it important to be in Cal's conference? This is UCLA athletes. 93% of UCLA athletes said it is important to be in USC's conference. Only 24% said it's important to be in Cal's. This is a slap, Cal Berkeley. This is UCLA being like, we do not need you. So why? Why would they want to join the Big Ten? Well, the big thing is national exposure and more resources. Because again, the money is not just money they're going to, the athletic department swims in like Scrooge McDuck. The money is, and we'll see it in a minute, is stuff like better nutrition, better academic support, better mental health support, better facilities. These are things that were important. Increased NIL opportunities, more TV opportunities to be seen across the country. These are why the students are supportive of this move. And we're gonna look in just a minute, guys, at some stuff about UCLA's finances. But I did a separate analysis. I won't bore you in this boring chart. But I think that UCLA is about the 5th healthiest athletic department financially in the country. And they're running at a little bit of deficit right now, but they have the resources for it if they want. They have all the money in the world. The only athletic departments I thought were financially healthier, and these are based on a bunch of complicated metrics I won't bore you on, but I thought Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, and Stanford were more financially healthy. then followed by Texas A&M, Florida, Penn State, Washington, Michigan State, blah, blah, blah. USC not far behind. So even like the thing is UCLA is a giant institution with a ton of money. So when we're talking about the money, and we'll show you this in a minute, it's all really kind of rounding errors. UCLA operates on we're talking about UCLA athletics is a $120 million business out of a $5 billion academic budget. Now, one of the interesting things here too, if you guys just look here at UCLA, the blue is the money they spend on football and men's basketball. The white is all the rest of their sports. So even in all of these places, remember, they're spending a lot of money on the rest of their sports. So football and men's basketball are paying for all those other sports. And we'll get to where that matters in just a sec. So this is actually their athletic department budget. Since 2019, they've been operating at a deficit. Now that's actually really kind of a little artificial because they had this huge mess with Under Armour. They signed this lavish contract with Under Armour. They got a ton of money, and then Under Armour bailed on it. They started losing money, and they had to pay a big buyout to Jim Mora. They also, I think, kind of hide some money a little bit. So their deficit, that's a real deficit, again, by their definition. But most athletic departments have deficits. Because remember, your decision to have a tennis team and a swim team and a baseball team and a hockey team and all this is losing money. It's a student activity you've chosen to make. So this shows everywhere, by the way, here, guys, where the line is negative. That is and I've done some cash flow profitability stuff. I won't bore you on the details of this. But if you see about half of the Power 5 and all of the G5 lose money on athletics. However, UCLA has all the money in the world. UCLA doesn't need to. This is all accounting games because UCLA, for example, has annual donations of 700. This is from a couple years ago, latest date, but 787 million a year in donations. Again, we're talking about a 20 million. Oh, we're in $20 million deficit. However, we'll recover from our $20 million deficit, but we raise 800 million a year in donations. We can afford our deficit. This is UCLA's. Go ahead. Sorry.
One quick question, Tony. The Big Ten figure there, is that an average per school?
Yeah, average per school of the Big Ten. And then that's an average per school of the Pac-12, excluding the original 5. So USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford, and Washington are on another planet, quite honestly. So that's the rest of the Pac-12, and then that's all of the Big 12. So you see, like, there is all the money in the world if they want to. Again, they're saying, this is our budget. We want athletics to be positive. But again, if they wanted to be like everybody else, they would have no problem paying for it. So this is their debt. You hear a lot about UCLA's debt. This is what, a year ago or whatever. It's a little higher now. It's about 100 million, 110 million or something. Now, bear in mind, the debt is debt to itself. Because again, they don't have, like, it's not like they're really in debt. Like, they have all the money. They're just saying, athletics, you owe the rest of the school this money. Set up, through the school's cash financing area. And they're charging themselves interest on that. But they still have less than just about anybody else. They have about the same as an average Big 12 school. They have less than the average Big 10, less than the average Pac-12, and way less than Cal. Because remember, Cal do this huge seismic renovation to their stadium. So it's really kind of yeah, go ahead.
So, Tony, considering the way UCLA is cooking the books, for lack of a better term, and the Big Ten being as successful as it is and as healthy as it is athletically, do you think they're implementing some of the same strategies to come up with that figure as UCLA, many of the schools in the Big Ten?
Well, remember, a lot of schools like to have debt because when universities issue debt, it's tax-free bonds. And universities can issue debt at, like, no interest. So it's like free money. So for universities, like, the idea of issuing debt is like, okay, well, instead of just like trying to fundraise everything, okay, we'll take on some debt and we'll pay it off over 10 years or whatever, because there's a lot of facilities renovations and stuff in the Big Ten. Cal, that money has to do with their stadium. Because again, it's like free money for universities to have debt. Because the interest rate is just nothing. And it's tax-free bonds. It's easy to sell. So again, this is a lot, and we're going to talk a little more about how they kind of. When we say, just a big clarification, guys, when we say cook the books, and this is the phrase I use all the time, Mark, is that like they have shady, dodgy accounting. It's not illegal. It's proper.
Yeah.
But accounting is meant to be interpreted, but it has elements in it that kind of get a bit dodgy. Now, I'm going to be a snarky USC nasty person for a minute. If UCLA was really worried about money, they wouldn't have thrown away about $2 million under the tarps for the USC game when they chose not to sell those tarp seats to USC people. So again, they're not that desperate. Not only that, but again, we talk about $100 million of debt. Well, a lot of this has to do with their sponsorship mess with Under Armour that wasn't bringing in money. Yeah, they got about $100 million of debt, but they're getting $67 million from Under Armour as part of their settlement. So they'll be fine. Not worth diving into, guys, here, but actually their debt problem does go back a little further. It was masked by some stuff with Under Armour and the Jim Mora settlement. But also they weren't growing their money. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that their football and basketball during this period when their finances went south, it was some of the worst times they've ever had for football and men's basketball. So the end of Jim Mora, the beginning of Chip Kelly was just abysmal for their football team. And at the same time, they fired their basketball coach. And basketball, they're like a big basketball school, and they were terrible in both of their sports. And so they weren't, not only were they, they weren't growing their revenue like a lot of the other schools, which is a big piece. Now, there's 4 things here we can talk about real quick where they cook the books a little bit. First of all, transfer pricing and tuition. So of that money, $16 million of it is money that UCLA pays itself for tuition. And it's a little bit of a debatable number. It's pretty close to that. So again, it's athletic departments and this is just the way they do it. It's how USC does it. They charge the athletic department for tuition and pay that money to the geography department or the math department, wherever the kids are studying. So that's not really actual money. It doesn't cost any extra money to put a football player in geology class, but they're paying for it anyway. Because at UCLA, they like sell at USC, I know they do this too. I think they do at UCLA. Like at USC, they sell the scholarships to each football player. Like the quarterback scholarship is named after somebody. So it's easy to fundraise for that. The next thing UCLA does, this is really interesting, is they don't own, they rent facilities from the school itself. So UCLA is paying rent to itself for its own facilities. So like there's a lot of shady accounting in it. Yeah, not improper shady, but like they're not really losing all that money. They also have a lot of uncredited revenue from campus services. So UCLA athletics, for example, they give away a t-shirt. They have to pay the school a trademark fee for that. All the revenue from parking, food services, licensing, all this from athletics doesn't go to athletics. It's paid, keeps all their parking revenue. The food services department keeps all their athletics food service revenue. And then again, this internal debt, this $100 million, is self-imposed. It's not really debt. They got $5 billion. They raised another $800 million a year. They're fine. So let's look at what they do say they're going to spend when they go to the Big Ten. So they think that increased travel is going to cost about $4.7 to $5.8 million more. Now they say they're going to spend overall $10.3 million extra to go to the Big Ten, but the rest of that is actually money they need to spend anyway. So like they need better nutritional support, they need better academic support, they need more mental health services. That's $2.9 million, $1 million, and another $600,000 that they have to spend anyway, and they're going to use the Big Ten money to pay for it. So so they've said, this is what they were presenting to the Regents. This is what we need to spend, and we need the Big Ten money to do it. And the Regents are all about that because the Regents are all about student support. Like, how do we get our students to be better graduates, better students, all that? That's what matters to the Regents. Yeah.
Tony, would we believe that the mental health services increase would be just,
more counselors
responding to a possible need for just the changes, the transition, the increased travel, those sorts of things?
So that's what they say. I think it's just they want more people. I think they just want to hire more people.
Okay.
Quite honestly, which is good. I mean, they want more. USC has this giant staff of mental health support people. It's like 20 of them. And so I think they just want, it's probably hiring 3 more people would be my guess.
I'm also curious, Tony, when you went through the student athletes at UCLA and their perception of the benefits of joining the Big Ten, a few of those seem to be pretty obvious because they're so reported in media in regards to the level of competition, the exposure through television and otherwise. But some of the other benefits that they mentioned, like the mental health, like nutrition, where are they getting that information to make them believe that that's going to be so much better joining the Big Ten?
Right here, because UCLA said when we join the Big Ten, we're spending more money on that for you. Because the thing is again, they're operating on a deficit, so they're cutting back where they can cut. But the big thing for UCLA is UCLA has told them, even though we can afford to lose whatever we want on athletics, we expect athletics to break even. So athletics, again, that's why they're low. Athletics has debt. The debt is to the school. So UCLA has said, hey, by the way, if we don't join the Big Ten, we're going to have to cut sports.
Okay.
Because
I thought maybe that was some kind of perception of them joining the Big Ten, but this is actually the school letting them know, once we join the Big Ten, we're offering more benefits in these areas. Okay.
Yeah, and my guess would be next year they'll probably start because they'll hire again. The money itself is not a problem. The cash flow is not a problem. It's the budgeting piece of it. So I mean, they have the money. So this is the stuff students want. So students are looking at it and saying, we'll have better facilities, we'll have all kinds of stuff. Now, George Kliakov's math, which again we've just mocked, and we've mocked it on the Pack Show, we've mocked it mercifully. He thinks UCLA is going to be in more of a spending arms race in the Big Ten than they have admitted to. So he thinks that when they start messing around with Ohio State and Michigan and Wisconsin, everybody else in Nebraska, that they're going to end up spending a whole lot more money on facilities and coaches and everything like that, and just all of this ramp up. And George Kliakov believes that the Pac-12 is going to, that UCLA, will spend way more money in the Big 12 than they will with the Pac-12, because they're going to be running around with the kids who spend a ton of money on a ton of stuff that maybe they need, maybe they don't. So when you hear George Kliakov say they're better off in the Pac-12, he believes that they are going to get caught in arms, and he's probably right. I don't think they're better off in the Pac-12 because I think they're going to get caught in the arms race anyway. I think they're both right.
Mm.
And this is the crux of it, guys. This is the difference between going to the Big Ten and staying in the Pac-12. Again, these are there's some estimates here because we don't know exactly what they'll get for the college football playoff. The Big Ten ramp up, it goes up significantly when USC and UCLA join, and it's a multi-year thing that's increasing. So it's about arguably 65 on the low end, 75 probably more realistic for the media rights. So the thing is we're talking about a difference of about $40 million a year between being in the Pac-12 and being in the Big Ten. So even when they said, you know what, UCLA, we'll give you an extra $18 million a year. Okay, well, you know what? That doesn't cover the difference in going to the Big Ten. It's half. And I'll show you a breakdown of where you get to it. It's really interesting. But at the same time, they can't make up the gap from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. There's the Big Two, and I call them the three triplets. So as much as the Big 12 people like to try to have these little pissing matches with the Pac-12, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC are all going to make right about the same amount of money. And the Big 10 and the SEC are just going to keep making more. And again, they're blaming Cal's losses on USC, as we talked about. So guys, this is really interesting. And we could spend like a half hour just talking about this chart. But the big thing is I've worked out the math on the benefits to the University of California and to the state of California on UCLA leaving to the Big Ten. And we've taken, what is the difference? If if they get what George Kliakov offered, even exactly what he offered, and the extra money the Pac-12 was willing to pay and all that, like who actually comes out better? And the truth is that I can't get UCLA to break even unless they join the Big Ten. Again, in their sketchy accounting world, but their sketchy accounting world is their real world as far as they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when they go to the Big Ten, I came out to figure out that the University of California will still come out about $16 million a year better for UCLA having joined and this is complicated. If you guys are really worried about it, you can email and tweet at me because I know there'll be nasty comments. I'm not going to read them or answer them, but you can email or tweet me if you want to break it down further and you're not just a crazy person. But UCLA, again, I think that they're going to make the University of California about $16 million a year more. But there's another piece of this too, which is not the Regents' interest, but the governor's interest and the state's interest. I think that when you add in the extra value that San Diego State will bring as probably an expansion addition to the Pac-12, the state of California will benefit to the tune of about $41 million a year more, being with UCLA joining the Big Ten. Kind of breeze through this here. This is just looking at like UCLA relative to the Big Ten, the Pac-12, the Big 12. UCLA's athletic budget right on par with the Big Ten school, more than Cal's, more than the Pac-12. Because again, the UCLA is this amazing athletic program. They are number 2 or 3, depending on your metric, in overall national championships won. Stanford, USC, and UCLA are way ahead of everybody else. It's the big 3, and then their next is like half as many. Look at UCLA's total academic budget. Even Big Ten schools are huge. The average Big 12 school has a $700 million academic budget. So the reason athletics is such a big deal at the Big 12 schools, again, of their $700 million, almost $100 million of that is sports. UCLA has this $127 million budget out of $5.1 billion. UCLA is 8, and this is not counting the medical stuff, the medical system. They also run a giant healthcare system. In addition to this, just the academic budget of UCLA is 8 times what a Big 12 school is, and more than twice what a Pac-12 school or a Big 10 school is. So again, this is a giant. I hate them because I cheer against them. Ha ha! We win the victory bell, guys. This is a great school, as much as we hate them. However, on average academic rankings, USC is still ahead. Their ticket sales, you guys know their attendance is not particularly good. It's still okay though. They're above Cal, but short of the Big Ten. They're still, by the way, ahead of the average Big 12 school. UCLA's ticket revenue is higher than most of the Big 12. Their donor contributions to the athletic department are also very healthy. But again, remember, their overall donations, $800 million a year. They have all the money in the world. This is a big thing with UCLA, is they are not taking any government or school support. Again, they say athletics, you have to break even. So does Cal. 98% less than the average Big Ten school. Their student fees, 67% less than the Big Ten. Student fees let people go to games and stuff. Their football spending at UCLA, on par with the average Big Ten school. So is Cal's. Higher than Pac-12 and Big Ten. And you look at their coaching salaries, they actually spend more on coaching salaries total than most of the Big Ten. And then real quick, because I know Mark has to go, let's talk about travel concerns. This travel thing, everybody's stressed about this. Everybody thinks it's going to be a huge drama. Well, it is not. They're really overblown by uneducated fans. And I want you guys to be educated on this so you guys don't make like the dumb comments about travel a lot of people do. So first of all, we talk a lot about charter flights. We're not chartering Concords. But first of all, even little teams like Gonzaga send their like volleyball and basketball teams on charter flights. That's very, very, very normal. Roger Dodger. Hold on, I got to point this out. Cal is not getting a very good return on football investment. Roger Dodger, that is true. Rose Bowl rent is expensive. It's actually not. They actually pay very little in rent to the Rose Bowl. It's a good deal.
Hey, Tony, by the way, I just have a 1:15 that I have to travel to. I got about 10 minutes.
For them. Way cheaper if they own their... Yeah, actually, we only need like 3 more minutes. Sorry. So first of all, guys, one thing you're hearing a lot, this got a lot of hubbub because it's really a good idea. They're talking about, first of all, USC and UCLA will share jets when they fly to games. It's not for football. We're talking about other like tennis and track and swimming and stuff like that. They'll fly together on the jet. That's, first of all, USC and UCLA already stay together when their teams go to Oregon for stuff. They all stay in the same hotel in Eugene, like together, and like the kids hang out on their day off. So again, remember, in most of these sports, these kids have grown up. Like, they all know each other. Most of them are friends. They were on the same travel teams together. They all went, football players, we joke, they all went to Bosco or Mater Dei. Like, USC and UCLA are very intertwined in their athletics. Even though they're big rivals, like, they're kind of friends. That's why they all, like, hug and take pictures together after the football games, even. And same with true as any sports. So, for example, you'd see, like, they'll send both, USC, UCLA track and USC, UCLA tennis to go play Michigan and Michigan State together. And they'll just charter like 757 and take them all. Again, not that different from what they do now. And it's pretty innovative and it's actually kind of cool. Save a bunch of money. But this is interesting in travel. So first of all, this is a breakdown of sports that have no impact in travel, sports that only have one difference, and then sports that are actually impacted. So in volleyball, water polo, beach volleyball, those sports are not Big Ten sports. So there is no change to their travel. They have no change. Then there's a couple sports, cross country, track and field, swimming, diving, golf, rowing. The only change is that they are going to go to the Big Ten tournament in, I don't know, Iowa City instead of the Pac-12 tournament in Eugene. That's it. The only change to their travel. Then there's a couple sports, football, tennis, basketball, baseball, softball, volleyball, soccer, gymnastics that are impacted. Baseball is going to kind of suck, but a lot of them actually aren't very impacted. So let's look at football. Because football, first of all, they charter a plane and they travel there anyway. Always. So the only difference to UCLA, this is looking at a hypothetical UCLA schedule. You know, UCLA this year, they had 4 away games in the conference. When they go to the Big Ten, they'll have 4 away games in the conference. You don't count USC because home or away, it's in the same town. So if you think about it, UCLA traveled to Colorado, they'll probably swap that for like Nebraska. Traveled to Oregon, that's a 3-hour flight anyway. You swap it to Iowa, it's about a 3.5-hour flight. Big deal. And then you got flights to Arizona and Cal. Those become flights to Minnesota and Michigan State. You know, it's a little further. As Chip Kelly said, not that big a deal. I mean, it's the exact same logistics. It's just you're on the plane for about hour or two longer for 2 of those trips. So Mark, I think people are way over selling the travel mess.
Yeah.
And let's look at men's tennis as kind of a final example. So all of this angst, people are wringing their hands about just, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It's going to be so awful. Let's look at the men's tennis schedule for UCLA. They only made, in the whole year, from October to May, they only made 2 conference road trips that are currently packed trips that will become Big Ten trips. 2. And then they'll swap out the Pac-12 tournament for the Big Ten tournament. Again, 2 plus that swap. I mean, look at their schedule. This is UCLA's men's tennis schedule. You know, they're already traveling to they go to this national, the ITA tournament. They already play a lot of local teams like Grand Canyon in where's that, in Arizona or whatever, UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, Pepperdine. They already go to Texas Tech. Or excuse me, go to Texas A&M. They play Texas Tech at home. They're already playing a national schedule. And again, only 2 trips in this national schedule. Again, includes TCU, University of San Diego. So this trip to Washington, Oregon, that'll probably become a trip to like Michigan and Michigan State. And everything else, San Diego, UC San Diego, SDSU. They already go to Weber State. They have a Pac-12 trip to Utah. That'll be like a Big Ten trip to Nebraska. They're already playing Hawaii. This team plays a national schedule already as is. And so it's not different. So anyway, guys, that was kind of a deep dive into UCLA and the Regents and the decision, but I wanted you guys to kind of understand the finances going into that and what's really going on with them.
Tony, we thank you so much because there's been so much misinformation out there and a lot of speculation and questions that are legitimate concerns that reasonable people would say, okay, these schools are all the way across the country. So there are reasonable concerns and questions. And thanks for clarifying that, because there are some logistical challenges, but they're not daunting by any stretch.
No, I really don't think they are. And I think it'll be really easy for them to manage. And again, I who knows, guys, I could be wrong, but like if they had the votes to stop UCLA from going, it would have been done a long time ago. And I think we would have heard a lot different things in the Regents meeting.
Absolutely. Very interesting. I have one more question for you that's only somewhat related. Do you have any insight into how well established, how successful UCLA's NIL initiatives have been? And while you're on the subject, USC?
So first of all, so I don't have a ton of insight into UCLA's. They're a little behind. USC does not have an NIL collective. interestingly, nobody believes me on this. It's true. USC does not have an NIL collective. Being in LA, USC has a marketing agency that actually the USC does not pay for play like a lot of these other places. They actually work with legit like sponsorship things. Like Caleb Williams is getting a fortune from Apple for Beats. Jordan Addison is like a spokesperson for United Airlines. Like these are actually the funny thing about USC, and nobody believes me on this, is that USC actually hasn't gotten its act together yet to have a real collective, because they're actually working. Being in LA, they're doing all the Hollywood stuff. They're real, and UCLA has some of the same stuff, DTR and some of those guys, where they're actually working with brands and companies and marketing agencies on legitimate marketing. Unlike Texas A&M, where they just like write you a check. So, for example, the Texas A&M, you just get a check. At USC, it's like, okay, you're actually going to be paid by United Airlines because you're sponsored by United Airlines, and you work through. They have a deal with, it's called Boulevard. It's like this special marketing agency for the athletes. They're actually doing marketing for the athletes. Funny enough, and again, none of you are going to believe me, but it's funny because a lot of the alumni at USC are really upset because they want an NIL collective, and actually, the guy who was advocating for it and trying to start it just died. So I don't know what's going on with it. Probably it took a backseat after his death like 2 weeks ago.
Which, if I'm understanding all that correctly, that's the way NIL should be working anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that was the idea, because NIL is name, image, likeness. It's marketing. Yeah. And if you go back in history, I'll tell you actually, and you guys, some of you guys heard me talk about this before, but like UCLA and USC have been sort of like shady doing this, like with Hollywood forever. Because, for example, Ronnie Knox, who's the famous UCLA quarterback in the 50s, or tailback, because tailbacks threw the ball then, had a 7-year multi-picture deal with MGM as a student that was so giant and so befuddling that the NCAA didn't actually know what to do about it. Because it was like wildly illegal, but like, I mean, it's in the New York Times. The NCAA was like, all right, but he can't play a football player. That was their compromise. So again, these, because being in LA, and actually, I mean, if you could get a team, and I guess Army has their own issues because it's military, but like a team in New York City could do the same thing. A team, Northwestern, I think, is trying to do a lot of stuff in Chicago that's like legit marketing, but nobody cares about Northwestern. Having USC and UCLA in LA with all of the marketing oomph and all of the Hollywood everything there just makes absolutely everything right for NIL. And it scares the bejesus out of all the other schools, because as soon as USC and UCLA get their act together on actual pay for play, and you have that marketing thing, I think it's going to get it might get really ugly, or it might get really fun, depending on your perspective.
Well, Tony, it's impossible for me once again to thank you enough for providing this service to our viewers here at the Voice of College Football. And I know you're on a number of other platforms, so thanks for making time here.
Thanks for having me.
We want to remind everyone that we've got a big day here in college football, centered on the Pac-12, of course. I'm going to be live pregame USC Utah. Tony, Tim, and Rick will be live here post-game USC and Utah Pac-12 championship game, of course, with Utah defending its Pac-12 championship and USC wanting that entry into the college football playoff. Will be huge.
Real quick, Mark.
Yes.
Could you even have imagined that you'd be saying that a year ago when they were 4-8?
I did not.
I love it. I love it.
Now, once Lincoln Riley took the job and the portal possibilities were, starting to fall into place, I thought, okay, it's still a couple of years away, but here we are. Yeah, it's been remarkable. And especially watching this team play UCLA and Notre Dame has greatly increased my perception and evaluation of how good a team this is and how decent they are defensively to be able to supplement the offense and really make a run and make it interesting in the playoff if they are able to close the deal tonight and get there.
Fingers crossed. But either way, it's the season. We're playing with house money this season. It's kind of fun.
Absolutely.
And we'll be glad. And I'll tell you, to everybody in the Big Ten, it'll be a lot of fun. We laugh. We say when USC and UCLA come to the Big Ten, it's either your perspective is either going to be, wow, this is awesome, or, oh my God, we hated Michigan and Ohio State, and now we just let in 2 more.
I just think it's going to be fascinating. And I just think we are void of all sorts of intriguing matchups in college football. And this is going to bring many of those together. That's just going to be phenomenal.
It'll be fun. Fight on, Mark.
Thanks, Tony. We appreciate it. And again, everyone, we will see you tonight. 6 p.m. Eastern time is my targeted date to do time to do pregame for USC and Utah. And then, of course, Tony, Tim, and Rick after the game. So keep it locked in here, the voice of college football.